Hi, my name is Morgan Barnett, and I'm a classical studies major here at the College of Worcester. I want to thank you first to taking the part in the virtual symposium and coming to listen to my presentation on my AIS, Boudica and Agrippina, an analysis of the representation of female power in Tacitus and Dio. I started this project wanting to find the historical figures from the characters that Tacitus and Dio write of Boudica and Agrippina the Younger. This is because historical female voices often go unheard, and I was interested in exploring the literary versions of these women and the biases of the authors that wrote them. Through a close literary analysis of Tacitus' annals and Dio's Roman history, I argue that gender, ethnicity, and positionality of these two women influenced how they are portrayed in the broader narratives. The first woman I looked at is Agrippina the Younger, as she comes first in both narratives. She was the great-granddaughter of the first Emperor Augustus and was the mother of the infamous Nero, who also happened to be the one to have her killed. In both narratives, she was characterized as a villain, as she made political maneuvers and influenced Claudius and to some extent controlled Nero. She was not viewed as acting as a Roman matron should, merely providing support to the careers of her husband and son and setting a good example of propriety to the masses. Both authors used her to demonstrate the weaknesses of Claudius, as she was able to easily control him. They also, primarily Tacitus, used her as an example to demonstrate the issues of bringing government into the domus, the domestic sphere, under the imperial regime, which allowed her and other imperial women to easily influence politics as they had the emperor's ear. She also seemingly disregarded the social structure, appearing alongside Claudius at political events, such as receiving and pardoning prisoners of war, receiving diplomats, and sometimes in front of the Roman standard, or almost as an equal, much to the dismay of the ruling men at the time. She acted outside of her role, which in turn influenced how Tacitus and Dio portrayed her, as a more over-controlling, overbearing, ambitious, villainous mother than the proper Roman matron. On the other hand, you have Boudica, who was introduced after the death of Agrippina. She was portrayed as a rightfully vengeful leader and mother, avenging herself, her daughters, and her people, the actions by the Roman army. She was not villainized in the same way as Agrippina was, as she was not Roman. She was a Briton, and so the Romans viewed her differently. She followed the expectations, as the Romans believed that it was customary indeed for the Britons to fight with leadership of women, as quoted in Tacitus' annals. Therefore, her leadership was not viewed in the same way, even though it was much more actively antagonistic towards the Romans. Her revolt was used as an example to demonstrate the faults of the Roman expansion, that the empire had expanded too far, so that there was no actual authority over the outermost colonies, thus resulting in the revolt. Through this analysis, I found that Boudica and Agrippina were used in similar fashion. The one point out the faults of the men who ruled them, Claudius, who was easily manipulated, and Nero, who did not pay much attention to the outer parts of the empire, and to demonstrate the problems within different aspects of the imperial regime. One of the reasons I focused on these women is the fact that their stories were juxtaposed in these histories. But in recent times, they have been studied separately, taken out of the context of the overall narratives. I wanted to bring them back together in this analysis to look at how characterization changed based on their difference in positionality, with Agrippina representing the center and pointing out the faults of the domestication of power, and Boudica representing the frontier, pointing out faults in imperial expansion. My analysis specifically focused on the biases of the authors, as a lot of the secondary scholarship on these women tend to avoid acknowledging, or only acknowledge briefly, the biases, especially in early research, which were primarily dominated by men. By looking at the characterizations within the text, one is able to begin to pull fact from fiction, creating a starting point to eventually give back, though perhaps not completely, the voices of these unheard and marginalized groups. I hope that this has inspired you, possibly, to read more about these women or ancient women in general, and thank you so much for listening.